And we had a chance last week on Friday to talk to an author and a publisher, and we only had about 5 minutes with this particular guest, and it just wasn't enough time, so we actually invited him back. And he's the publisher of the TrendsJournal. Let us say good afternoon to Gerald Celente. Gerald.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me on, Barry.
No, I'm glad to do it. You and I got into a dissertation last week, and actually I was laughing. I was laughing a lot, and actually I laughed past the post here, and I almost went into the news. But I was thinking about you on Saturday. I had to take my son down to the airport. Ooh. The airports today, I don't understand where people think they're going. It looks like they're somewhere between a beach ball bingo and a barbecue, the way they travel in the airports. You wrote an article recently, or it was something in the journal about Who Cares America?
Yeah, we said, don't blame Obamacare, blame I don't care.
That was it.
And when you look at what's happened to this nation, and it's not like, I'm an old guy and, a farty old guy that looks down at young people. I mean, a guy that grew up in I grew up in the Bronx and Yonkers, Mm-hmm. It wasn't like, I was a sheltered kid and have an attitude that, I went to Harvard, Princeton, or Yale, I barely got out of PS 76. So it's not like, I'm a stiff old cat.
Right.
And as you look around with just objectivity, and by the way, the motto of the TrendsJournal is think for yourself. We don't tell anybody what to think, what to believe, how to believe. And here are the facts as we see them, the ones that are available to us, and then make your own decision. So as you mentioned, you took your son to the airport, and you see the way people dress. There's no self-respect anymore. There's a new study, by the way, that just came out that shows that young people that are very overweight, bordering on obesity, do not consider themselves overweight.
I wonder why that is. Well, I've talked about this in the program, and we mentioned it, you and I briefly. I've talked about it with other guests. When I was growing up, and you and I are about the same age. I was born in 49, you a year or two before. So we're the same age. When I was growing up, I didn't have, and I don't want this to sound wrong, but I didn't have one fat friend. Everybody was, we were outside all the time. We were working. And today, you in the supermarket, you see these people, little kids with their parents, and they're putting more junk in the cart than the parent is.
Exactly. And again, as we were mentioning, you never saw people riding down wide aisles in electric cars because they can't walk.
Oh, it's terrible.
I mean, this is serious stuff.
It is.
Because what we're looking at as trend forecasters, this is going to be the greatest cost to American health care. And so the way we arrange this piece, don't blame Obamacare, blame I don't care. You could have the best health care system in the world, and we do have the most expensive one, and it doesn't make any difference when people are filling themselves with garbage food. Garbage in, garbage out. And again, this new study showing, and the reason why young people, the people under teens, don't consider themselves fat, even though their body mass weight is way over, is because it's becoming the norm. That's the important element of it. So as you look across the spectrum, the lowered bar has become the norm.
When I was growing up, my parents both smoked cigarettes, as did everybody I knew in the 50s and so. Everybody was smoking cigarettes. However, when it became evident that cigarettes was a health hazard, people stopped smoking. And I think the smoking rate now is about 20% of the population smokes. And I don't know why they smoke, but they do. Do you see any change, Gerald, in the fact that it's now becoming evident that being overweight puts you at the risk of heart disease, diabetes, and whatever? Do you see any way to reverse this trend about people just gorging themselves?
Yes, and to me it has to start at a cultural level. There was a thing one time called a Renaissance.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at the Renaissance, it followed the Black Plague in Europe.
Okay.
A third of Europe was wiped out. Everybody knew somebody that died. So they got it in their heads that we're doing something wrong. So what they did was they went back to the past. In Italy, in Florence, at the height of the Renaissance, they would say, alla Romana e all'antica, in the manner of the Romans and the ancients, to celebrate the quality and greatness of what was. and then they retrofitted it for the time. Right now, there's the attitude, hey, we know best. Hey, I got a word for you. Chew on this one. We're the, what do they call the Americans? The exceptionals.
Yeah.
You hear the politicians shooting that one off at every political rally they could get their mouth opened on. No, we're not exceptional. We're downgraded at every level. The middle class is dying, and I'm not making that number up. Median household incomes below 1999 levels. The new studies coming out is showing college grads are getting wages now that are 20% or more below what college grads should be getting. And you go up and down the list. As I mentioned, the weight problems, and again, as we point out in this whole article, when you used to go to the ball games, people were dressed, and now people, they're either in a team shirt, no shirt, screaming. The louder, the better. You go into restaurants. I remember as a young guy, in the business world, going into a restaurant without a jacket. I was living in Chicago at the time. I'll never forget. Sorry, you can't get in here.
Oh yeah.
And you realize, and there was a decorum when you went in there. You didn't hear people screaming from 3 tables away, and you're hearing every damn word they're saying, and the music wasn't blasting in your ear. You go to the theater, you go to the opera, it's a horror show, it's a house of horrors, the way people are walking in, and the behavior level. So going back, can it be changed? Yes. And I believe it could be changed through culture, art, joy, and beauty, and quality. Quality is something that doesn't count anymore. Go shopping at a Walmart or a Target or a Home Depot or anywhere, and it's like walking in to a large self-storage unit.
Yes, it is.
I'm serious.
No, I'm feeding at the trough here. You're preaching to the choir. I'm agreeing with everything you say.
So now it goes back to you never heard of me. You never had me on your show. You don't know anything about my magazine. I said, Barry, we're off the air. I got this great idea. We're going to go into the penal system, and we're going to go to the most violent criminals in the penal system, the ones that they don't give shoelaces to or belts to, because if they use these things as weapons, they'll choke you with them. Mm-hmm. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a fashion statement. Yeah, so people will be wearing their pants below their waist, and their butts will be hanging out, and they won't have shoelaces. Oh, now we're going to come out with a whole music genre. We're going to call it gangster rap. No, it doesn't. We don't need instruments. Forget about it. All we got to do is really talk stupid. All right? We're going to take the lowest common denominator of society and promote it throughout the culture. You would get off the phone, you say to a producer, who put this guy on?
Where did we get this guy?
Where did we get this sick son of a guy, right?
Yeah, I got you.
And that's what they did. And everyone applauds it. And when you speak against it, oh, you're not hip. They take it easy, Jack. I'm hip. I got the story. And by the way, hipsters ain't hip either, man. Plaid shirts and jeans with a jacket and sneakers. Hey, save it for somebody else.
Gerald, how did we get to where we are now? Because I'm agreeing with what you say. And the other thing I noticed is now it's very cool. When I was younger, when you were going somewhere, you used to shave. Now it's cool to have 3 days growth, not 5, not 1. You got to look like you're just slightly scrungy, right?
Well, again, as I said, hipsters ain't hip.
Yeah.
It's that whole look. They're a cartoon character. A number of things. Consolidation of the media. Mm-hmm. Consolidation. They used to have laws in place. The FCC didn't allow newspapers and radio and TV stations to own. This was deregulated under Clinton. I'm a political atheist, by the way. I don't believe in any of the political parties.
Oh, I'm with you there.
Yeah. To me, they're the Bloods and the Crips. They're murderers and thieves, and they don't say that sarcastically. Only by their wars, and they're stealing our dough to give it to their friends in the name of too big to fail. But you go back to the deregulation of the communications industry. So now it's been consolidated. So you're only getting one message. Then the deregulations of acts such as Robinson-Patman Act, Sherman Antitrust Act, Clayton Antitrust Act. In the old days, small shops could compete with the big guys, and they would do it by putting different variety in there. Now you can't do it because in the deregulation of those acts, for example, let's say I'm going to open up a shoe store and you're Target. You're going to go to the shoe guy and you're going to say, I want 6,000 dozen of those or whatever. And I want 6 dozen. Who's going to get the better price?
That would be the other guy.
Right, the guy that orders 6,000 dozen.
Mm-hmm.
No, not under the old laws. Everybody's equal.
Oh, boy.
The only way we're going to give you a break, Barry, is on shipping. We could do something with that. That's why you had all of these other diversified shops. And that's why you had variety, because of small boutiques, small outfits, small record labels, small everything could compete because of the laws.
Yeah, you're
they
right.
were put in place at the change of the 19th to 20th century. In the old days, they called them robber barons. Today, they got nicer names. They call them hedge funds and venture capitalists, and private equity groups.
I was looking at Wikipedia. My son was living in Tampa, Florida, so I wanted to see how many radio stations were in Tampa, Florida, and there's a whole slew of them. Every radio station in Tampa, Florida was owned by the same major company.
You got it.
I figure, how can one company own every radio? They had the sports, they had the Spanish, they had the religious, they had the talk, they had the rock and the pop. And I said, wow, that's amazing. Every station, and now they're putting all of them in the same building, and they're coming in on the same satellite. Yeah, no.
Right, and then you're going to get programmed with no emotional charge in it other than a bottom line mentality. And again, that happened under Bill Clinton. I began my career as the assistant to the Secretary of the New York State Senate at 23. I taught at St. John's University, American Politics, Campaign Technology. I was a chief government affairs specialist for the chemical industry back in the 70s. One of my chief writers in my magazine, the TrendsJournal, is Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, former assistant Treasury Secretary under Reagan. So with guys that have been there, we know what it looks like. So when I say this about Clinton or anything, I could go on about Bush for 7 weeks. And the wars and et cetera. Mm-hmm. But Clinton destroyed the fabric of this nation more than anybody with with NAFTA, sending our jobs overseas under the big lie. And I'll never forget the debate with Al Gore and Ross Perot on how we were going to get rid of those dirty manufacturing jobs and our standard of living would increase with these service sector jobs. He did it with the deregulation of the communications industry. He did it with the deregulation of the Glass-Steagall Act that was put in place following the crash of 29 so the banks couldn't steal all our dough and the Wall Street Mafia couldn't run up another rigged game. It was under his administration. So to change these things have to be put back into place. The other thing is, how can you do it? Again, it goes back to culture. Mm-hmm. I'm of Italian descent. Giuseppe Verdi, in the 1800s, Italy, it was controlled by Germany had a piece, Austria had a piece, Hungary had a piece, Spain, France. The Neapolitans and the Calabrese spoke a different language. It was Verdi's desire in creating his music to unite the people by raising their spirit with his music. And he did it. When he died, it was the largest funeral in recorded history. They had a nearly bloodless revolution. He did it with music. The model exists, and the reverse model exists. In the TrendsJournal, we have a picture of Sarah Vaughan. And then we have that Miley Cyrus with his tongue sticking out and grabbing a crotch in a stupid outfit. So just as the culture could do it one way, it could do it the other way. But the human spirit has to rise to that level.
Gerald, do you think we're getting there? Because I'm starting to see a lot of blowback against, things in the area, and the politics and the culture and everything. Are we starting to turn the corner, or you're not that optimistic?
Well, yeah. Well, I'm not. It's not, to me. It's not either optimism or pessimism. It's what is. When I learned this, by the way, about Verdi, I'm in upstate New York, Kingston, which was the first capital, and they